Are we ready to get started? Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second half of the second day of the Independent Games Summit. Is there a huge echo, or is that just in my head? All right. First, I want to thank Simon Carlos for putting this whole thing together. Can you stand up? Let's give him a round of applause. I think that, yeah. You know, when we were chatting just now before I got started, we were saying that, is it echoing? Am I, yes? Okay, see, there, my voice is too loud, I think. That's my problem. We were just chatting before this that, you know, several years ago, the idea of talking about independent games, comparing independent games, independent film, and other media was something that was a little more bizarre and unusual. You didn't hear as much. And I think that this summit here is really an indication of the fact that people are thinking about independent games. Now, exactly what are independent games? Does that refer to business models? Does it refer to design innovation? Does it refer to the small scale of production or the process by which you make games? Does it refer to the way that they're funded and distributed? I think all that stuff is up in the air. You know, I mean, independent games may simply refer to ways of making games that question the conventions of the mainstream game industry. But I think regardless, I think all of these points of view that are being aired here over these 2 days is very exciting to me personally. I'm here to talk to you today about, am I wrong that I have a weird, I'm hearing my voice echoing? Okay, but you guys are working on it, right? Oh, it's just the room? All right. So I'll just get started and try to ignore myself. So the title of this talk originally, as Simon had requested, was the casual cash cow, and I forced him to add a question mark to the end of that because I didn't want to seem necessarily so optimistic about what it means to make games in the casual game industry. And as I elaborated the talk, there's a lot of things that I'd like to share. And not just talk about casual games, really talk about other aspects of running an independent game company. Just to let you know who I am, I'm a game designer. I've been in the game industry for 13 years. Gamelab, my present company, is 7 years old, so Gamelab is not the start of my time in the game industry. I come from doing retail PC games. As I mentioned, I'm one of the 2 co-founders of Gamelab, a game development company based in New York City. I have taught on and off over the years at places like MIT, NYU, New School University, places around the New York City area. I've written books about games. I've worked closely with the IGDA and try and do as much as I can to advocate for independent games and games and academics collaborating together and things like that. Here's a couple books that I co-authored with Katie Salen. I'd love to talk to you today about game design, but alas, that's not my lot, or maybe that's you guys should be thankful for that. I am going to talk today about my company, Gamelab. As I mentioned, we're based in New York City. We have grown really steadily and organically and slowly over the last 7 years, from just my co-founder Peter Lee and I to now a staff of about 32 people in the office. And I'm going to be talking a lot about what we've done and how we've gotten from there to here over the course of my talk. But first, I want to show you guys a reel that shows you some of our work. Some of the stuff that you're going to see is stuff that hasn't launched yet, so it is exciting. Now, actually, before I do this, I should probably turn the sound on. So this first game is called Out of Your Mind. We're going to be showing it at the Experimental Gameplay Workshop later today. It takes place inside your client's minds, and you're trying to get rid of these little creatures that cause negative behaviors and bad thoughts. Work is a game that this is an alpha presently. It is set in an office environment, and you have to keep the office flowing smoothly, but also take care of your workers' sort of idiosyncrasies, like the guy that likes to sleep on the couch. Downbeat is a game we did with VH1. It is a rhythm action game, a downloadable game. So that is something that we hadn't seen done successfully. It, of course, features the classic VH1 sort of 80s tunes and pop culture references. Arcadia Remix is a revision of a game that we did several years ago for Shockwave.com called Arcadia, now a downloadable game. It's made out of these little tiny mini games, and you play up to 4 of them all at the same time. So it's a different kind of play experience. This is an example of educational stuff that we've done. This was a collaboration with a nonprofit in New York City called Global Kids. We actually collaborated with high school students who picked the theme of this game, which was a kind of simulation of poverty in Haiti. This is Diner Dash, which is probably most familiar to you guys. It was a game that we did with a publisher, Play First, the first downloadable game that we did. This is a lesser well-known Play First game called Egg vs. Chicken, another downloadable game. It's a kind of puzzle game plus a siege game where you're enacting the eternal war between eggs and chickens. Plantasia is a gardening game, and it's a sort of like a very light sim game. You are cultivating your garden and trying to make flowers grow. You can turn the music up a little bit. This is a game that we launched this fall called Shop Mania. It's sort of a parody of mass market consumer culture. You work in this Walmart-style store where the customers don't know what they want, so you choose stuff for them. This is a game that we did with Lego called Lego Fever. It's a very sort of psychedelic nostalgia trip through Lego world. You're turning this boring gray world into color. Just don't tell Lego that I used the word psychedelic. I don't know if they're in the room. But it was designed for adults. Here's a game called Subway Scramble, again launched around the same time as Diner Dash. Another action puzzle game, getting commuters to their destinations. This was actually the web game that now we're going farther back into our history. This is a web game called Junkbot. You don't move Junkbot around the screen, but you move the Legos around to try and get Junkbot to the trash can. So it's our translation of the kind of Lego modularity and construction-based play into a digital game context. This is the first game that Gamelab ever made called Blix. Is this familiar to anybody in the audience? Yeah, some people know Blix. So you just click to make bumpers that ricochet the ball into the cup. Very simple interface. Here's a game called Loop. This was Gamelab's second game, and sort of cut paper aesthetic, drawing lines to loop butterflies of the same color. This is Lego World Builder, probably our most popular game that we did with Lego. It's kind of like a mini real-time strategy game. You build units that do things. There's another Lego game. It's a tactics game where that's set in a kind of cyberspace environment. What else is on this reel? Okay, so some more of our web game work. This is a project that we did with Cartoon Network for Transformers, and we do every year at the GDC. We do a massively multiplayer offline game. This was last year's game. This one this year is called Gangs of GDC, and it actually uses mobile phones. So we're breaking our paper-only aesthetic for these games. That takes place Wednesday and Thursday. Here's a sneak preview of the Gamelab website that hasn't launched yet. Our website, we really want to be about who we are, what we think about games. So it's going to have essays and more of a blog-style site than the average downloadable game developer site, and ideas for merchandising some of our properties. Those are Creatures from Out of Your Mind on the right. And that's sort of a taste of Gamelab. So I feel so commercial here, showing like a polished reel with a soundtrack after some of the panels where it's people opening up folders and showing prototypes of their games. On the other hand, I think that's one of the things that maybe distinguishes Gamelab is that we really did start extremely small, and we've been around for, like I said, 7 years. And so Gamelab is a little bit of a different company than some of the other independent game developers that presented here. And I think that part of what I wanted to do was talk to you guys about how it is that we managed to survive and what we've done from a business point of view. Also, because Simon really wanted me to talk about casual games, I'll be talking about that as well. And I also also really wanted to talk about the intangibles of running a game company. And I know that there are some other great talks and sessions. Some have happened, some are going to happen, about development, about business, about making strategic decisions in terms of the legal structure of your company and things like that. I wanted to talk more about the intangibles, those things that often fall through the cracks in terms of building your company culture, the way you relate to the outside world. So my talk is, for those of you that have seen other talks, there's not going to be audience participation. This is not a game design theory talk, which is normally the kind of thing that I do. But I did want to share sort of lessons learned and best practices in terms of what we've learned from running Gamelab all these years. So we got started with we got started doing Blix, and the origin of Gamelab is that Peter Lee, who is an extremely talented guy, he did the visual design and the programming on Blix. I did the game design, and we collaborated with Michael Sweet of Audio Brain to do the sound. We got the game into the Independent Game Festival, which I think was their second year, however many years ago that was. And the fact that we were a finalist, we won an award for Best Audio, got Blix picked up by Shockwave.com. So in fact, we are sort of a success story from the Independent Game Festival. And I think that certainly without that money that we got from the advance from Shockwave, we wouldn't have been able to open up our office. And this was before the .com crash. This was still in the year 2000. So people were still shelling out what now seem like strange large amounts of money just for web-based content. So I'm going to alternate a little bit between talking about, am I making those noises? Because my microphone is bumping against my jacket? Okay. Look, as the audio guy said, yes, you're making those noises. Okay, I'll try and be a little more static in the interest of audio tranquility. So I'm going to alternate a little bit talking about the history of our company and our products and how we evolved with kind of inserting some of these intangibles. And the reason why I really want to talk about these business intangibles is because people on earlier panels have talked about the fact that passion is important. You have to love what you do, know what you want to do. I agree with that. But I think that passion is necessary but not sufficient if you really want to grow beyond just 1 or 2 or 3 people into a sustainable company. I mean, the casual games that we do or the downloadable games that we do can't be done by 1 or 2 or 3 people. We have teams of 5 or 7 people working on a title, and once you want to have more than one of those happening at once, suddenly you're growing to 20 people, 30 people, and you're suddenly running a company of scale. And you have to think about some of these issues. Now, what do I mean by staff authorship? Well, I worked in several other places before I started Gamelab. I worked at a company in New York City called RGA Interactive, which at the time was making CD-ROM games for PC. I freelanced around for a while. I had started another company called Flat that still exists, but it's not really focused on games, which is why I left it. And one thing that I've learned from doing all of that work is that the most important thing that Peter Lee and I try and inculcate into the way we work at Gamelab is this idea of staff authorship. That people feel like the work that they're doing is their work, right? That they're not sort of going to a job and clocking in and doing some sort of tasks that they're given by someone else, and at the end of the day they clock out. That in fact, people doing creative collaborations, making intellectual property, whether it's on the business or the programming end or the visual design end, they have to feel like it's their work and that they're the authors of it. And the trick to actually accomplishing that is that you can't fake it. In other words, the only way to actually have people feel like they have authority and responsibility over what they do is to actually give it to them, is to actually give people the authority and the responsibility to make decisions about what they want to do. You can give people financial incentives to stay at your company and feel like they own it, right? I mean, you can have employees with stock option plans or profit sharing plans. Again, that's sort of necessary but not sufficient. People on a day-to-day basis need to feel like that the work that they're doing is their work. And if you have people that you've given this sense of authorship to, then a lot of your problems that you encounter over the course of your company will get solved. I mean, really the worst situations I've ever encountered in my professional life were all about someone that was had a title of creative director, who said, I'm the vision person on this project, and all of you work for me, sometimes that explicitly. And nobody felt like it was their work, and nobody really respected the person that was in charge of that project, the so-called creative director. And that's a sort of opposite situation, again, of this feeling of staff authorship. One of the ways that we try and do this in our companies, we make sure that everyone is challenged. We make sure that people in every department of the company are being given things to do that they want to do. So it's really more my business partner, Peter Lee. He's constantly talking to our staff, asking them, are they working on the projects that they want to work on? How do they want to grow their careers? What are the things that are most interested in them? And because we have several projects going on at once, we're always kind of mixing and matching our staff. And even though Gamelab in many ways is a sort of game design driven company, we always want to make sure that in terms of visual design and programming and even project management, we're always having challenges for our staff to rise to. Now the funny thing about this is that, yeah, this is not necessarily the easiest way to go. Often you can have senior staff at a small company who really know have a lot more experience, and given all of their druthers, they probably could say, look, this person is making classic mistake A, classic mistake B, classic mistake C, and can go in there and sort of fix things. But part of what you have to do in giving people the sense of employee authorship, of really empowering them, is letting people make mistakes. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. This is something that I struggle with personally a lot, is trying to give the game designers at Gamelab a real sense of autonomy and the ability to solve their own problems in their own way. And the way that all of this stuff manifests at Gamelab is that we don't have creative directors at Gamelab. We don't have a vision person on a project. We have small teams, like I said, about 5 to 7 people usually. And if you're the game designer on a project at Gamelab, you're the authority on game design. If you're an intern and someone says you need to design this character, you have to solve this problem. You have to solve the challenge that you've been given. There's no creative director that's going to say, this is good or this is bad. Now, in a situation where there's a lack of sort of trust and communication among your staff, this can lead to problems. People can get territorial. They can say, don't tell me what to do. I'm the authority on sound in this project. I don't want any input from you. But in an environment where you create sort of trust and respect and communication, the opposite happens, which is that people are desperate for feedback. So that someone who's doing the visual design says, I need you all to give me feedback to help me integrate what I'm doing into what the other members of the team are doing. And so then suddenly you have visual ideas coming from the programmer, and you have process ideas coming from the game designer. And so you have all of this great sort of cross-fertilization that's happening over the course of a project. And I think that we've been very lucky, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to be process-focused, but it ties very much into this feeling of staff authorship. So when we first started Gamelab, as you saw, some of the games that we did were web games. And I call it low-hanging fruit because we were in New York City. There still is very little kind of retail game industry there. Downloadable games hadn't happened yet. Games were not being distributed over the internet, but there were web pages where people were putting up games for free and people were paying for them. So we went for that because that was the work that we could do. Greg Kostikian, who's spoken here, has a great quote, and I quote him often. Greg Kostikian has said, look, if you're forming a game development company, you really have to figure out where you want to focus what you want to do. And he sort of describes it as there's 3 kinds of focuses that a development company can have. You can focus on technology, whether that's artificial intelligence or network technology or graphics technology or some browser plugin. You can focus on business, right? That might be a new revenue model, a new kind of way that your clients are going to have their lives enhanced by paying you money to get their advertising on your website. It may be the way that your funding structure or your revenue structure is planned to happen. So it could be technology, it could be business, or it could be content. And by that, Greg means all sort of forms of user experience. It might be that you're known for great visuals and animations or telling great stories or great gameplay. And so what Greg says is that there's no way you can focus on all 3, right? And it's very unlikely that you could focus on 2 of those. You really should focus on one of those areas and say, that's what our company is about. And at Gamelab, we knew from the start that we wanted to focus on content, right? That we wanted to make games that in terms of the player experience were innovative, although I realize that's quite a loaded word after the great panel yesterday on innovation, but that created new kinds of experiences for players, and that especially in terms of gameplay, we wanted to create those experiences. So even as we were doing these web games, and you saw some of these games in the reel that I showed, we really always stayed focused on making sure that every game that we made followed through on that vision for our company, that there was something innovative about the gameplay and about the experience, that we wanted to invent new forms of play. Now, one of the ways, if you are kind of and here's one more shot from Lego World Builder. If you are kind of a creatively driven company, or which I think any game development company is, now we're switching back to one of these business intangibles, right? Intangibles of running a game studio. We really try and create a culture of research at Gamelab, and we mean something very specific by that. By research, I mean ways that the work that your staff are doing in the company connects with the world outside the company. And why is that important? It's because, I mean, we make pop culture, right? All of us, most of us, I guess, in the room are game developers. And what you don't want to have happen in creating a form of culture is that it gets very incestuous. People work at your company very long hours. They don't have a lot of connection to the outside world, and they kind of end up making games by and for gamers. Whereas what we always try and have our staff feel like, we're trying to encourage them to have rich lives outside the company. We like our staff to have we like our programmers to make robotic artworks. We like our visual designers to have side projects that are zines and things like that. Josh, one of our programmers sitting in the back, is a DJ, you know, so when your staff have rich cultural lives outside the company, they bring that stuff into the work they do in your company. I think one of the questions about the cultural aspects of independent games is really having a staff that's sort of culturally smart and sophisticated. That doesn't mean any one thing. That doesn't mean you have to be an English major. It doesn't mean you have to like high art like ballet and opera. It doesn't mean you have to be a pop culture vulture, you know, loving anime and manga. It could mean different things for your staff, different things for each individual member of your staff. But it's important that you think about and design a culture of research. Because that's what's going to lead to doing new kinds of work at your company. So I just want to give some, and the most important thing is that you actually design it, right? Most of the time when you're starting a company, you're just barely hanging on. Everyone is working really long hours. And all of this stuff that I'm talking about, the feeling of real authorship by your staff, creating a company culture, it just gets left by the wayside, right? But in fact, it's incredibly important. And it's incredibly important to think about it from the very beginning. What kind of company are you going to make? And what kind of experience are your staff going to have? Because ultimately, just like the rules of a game produce the play, the experience of the player, right? You design the rules, you design the structures, but then the player's experience kind of emerges from that. The company structures that you design result in the experience of your staff and the games that come out of your company. So you think about your company as a process, right? You as the founder or some of the founders of the company create those structures. The games that happen as a result in many ways are kind of an emergent effect of those structures. So it's really important to try and design your company culture. Just be aware of it. That doesn't mean you have to have a plan and be anal about it and over-design it, but be aware that there is some company culture that's being created, some kind of daily experience of your staff. And for us, we wanted to focus on content, and we knew that we wanted to have research practices ongoing. So what do we mean by research? Well, we have an extensive research library at Gamelab. People are always reimbursed for anything that they want to buy, books, magazine subscriptions, video games for the company. We organize activities. This is just a screenshot from our visual design department. One day went out and someone wanted to sculpt, so we went out and bought some Sculpey clay and a toaster oven where we could bake it, and they occasionally have sculpture nights. And anyone can join them, but it's mostly the visual designers. This is a scene from we have game jams, very rarely, like maybe once a year. It's very hard to fit them in to sort of set aside a whole day, but we do have them. So these are people with, each of those pieces of paper has a word. We split up into, how many teams did we have this time? 3 teams, I think. And each team had to create a game based on words that they selected. And there was just a kind of design exercise. The games that we do at GDC similarly are a little bit guerrilla PR stunts, but they're also kind of game design experiments for us. They're research. I didn't have a good picture of anyone teaching, but this is some game labbers, including me. That's my business partner, Peter, on my right, Katie Salen, Min O, and we're sitting with Jim G and Mackenzie Work, who are two game researchers. So we encourage our staff to have relationships with the universities to teach, to publish, to write, to give talks. Again, as a research activity, when you're teaching about something, you learn about that thing. We also do other kinds of events. These are from karaoke nights that we have, but you learn from these things. There's a Gamelab soccer team, and you learn things about gameplay, game design, game experience, even being on a company soccer team. We also play games a lot in the office. This is an example of this was soon after the DS came out, and there would occasionally erupt kind of mass DS games. They're probably playing 8-player Mario Kart right there. And we also encourage our staff to make up their own research activities. People have organized anime nights, paper role-playing game groups that meet. And we also have regular board gaming nights that this is a shot from. So back to sort of what we do for money, right? So we're doing web games. We also do consulting. If you have a focus to your company, you can sell that focus. For us, these are some of the companies that we've consulted with. I just was able to grab this image. There's a lot more companies we've consulted with. Disney and Leapfrog and Fisher-Price on all kinds of things, but usually having to do with our focus, right? Consulting, I call it short-term cash because usually it's a small job, it doesn't involve production resources, and if you build this expertise through research and through sort of refining what your company's about, it's a way for you to earn revenue. And it's certainly not our main source of revenue, but it's been a way for us to sometimes have a little bit of extra cash in the bank. The next thing I want to talk about is being an honest hustler. So research is really about how your company relates to the outside world. Hustling your company is also really important. You should have someone when you're starting your company who is sort of the designated hustler. I am the main hustler at Gamelab, which means I am the one who enjoys schmoozing. I like getting up in front of crowds and talking. I like meeting people. I'm gregarious socially, right? My business partner, Peter Lee, who many of you probably know less than me because that's not really his thing. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't like doing that. He's fine with me being the hustler for the company. But it's important that you designate someone for that job. The most important thing is that you know what you're hustling. And again, all of these things I'm talking about are interrelated. What is the focus of your company? Can you summarize what is distinctive and different about your company? You don't just want to say, we make really cool cutting-edge games. When I'm describing Gamelab, if I were to sort of say it in 10 words or less, I usually say, let's see. Gamelab is an independent game company based in New York City. We make innovative games for broad audiences. That might mean new kinds of content, new kinds of looks and feels, but especially new forms of gameplay. Most of the stuff that we do is either played online or distributed online, although we've made games for all kinds of platforms on and off the computer. So in that little tiny bit, you get a sense of, who we are and what we do. It's really important that you know how to hustle your company, but you hustle your company in different ways to different contexts. So if I'm talking to a potential academic partner or the MacArthur Foundation that's funded some recent projects, I emphasize the fact that a lot of our staff teach at the university level. I emphasize our relationships to the university and maybe our research activities. If I'm talking to a reporter who's really interested in the independent game scene, I might emphasize the games that we do at the Game Developers Conference every year, our massively multiplayer offline games. I might talk about the fact that we're independently owned, that we've been around for a long time, and that we're kind of a fixture in the independent games community. So you have to hustle differently depending on who you're talking with. The other thing is that it's really important that even though I'm the main person that is kind of the interface for the outside world, it's really important that your staff feel that they're also the authors of the vision. We're constantly kind of refining and tuning who we are. If when we're redoing our logo, we involve staff in that process. When we're making marketing materials, we include people in that process too. Again, if people feel like they're helping to author who your company is, then that's tied into that feeling of staff authorship. They're authors not just of the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but also of the company as a whole. And if your staff are really have that feeling that they're part of what is making Gamelab or making your company, then they're going to help hustle your company for you, that they'll be happy to represent your company and they'll talk well about it. Not having a shared vision for what the company is, not being able to really articulate it in a clean way, is an incredibly common mistake that happens when people start companies. So people say, hey, I'm an artist, you're a game designer, you're a programmer. What's that? 15 minutes left? Okay, thanks. It can really bring a company down. It's happened to me before too. So this sort of ties into that. Also, be honest, right? When I say hustle, I don't mean hustle in the sense that you should sort of overhype things and end up lying to people and puffing yourself up bigger than you are. The most important thing that you can do is do great work and then point at that work. Hustle, but do it honestly. So let's talk about downloadable games. We got involved in downloadable games. Sometimes I call them shareware too, because they're basically, you get something for free and then you can pay for the rest of it. Diner Dash was our first game. We were really lucky in that that was a big hit, and that sort of really helped establish us in the downloadable game industry. And we followed it up with several other games. There were some on our reel. Here's another one, Shop Mania, that we did with iWin as a publisher. So let's talk about the casual game industry. I have mixed feelings about it. First of all, I hate that term casual. I just feel like what musician would want to say, I do casual music? But it's a kind of a business term, and like independent, it can mean different things, but it's what it's called, so we'll call them casual games. There are deep problems with the casual game industry, but there's some exciting things about it too. I think some of the problems are that it's low conversion. That means that any game, and you guys know the way that it works, I assume. You go to Yahoo Games, you download a free trial, you can play it for free for an hour. After that hour, it locks you out. And if you want to continue playing, you pay $20 on your credit card. Now, if the people that pay for that game spend, if 1% or more of the people that actually downloaded your game and buy it, 1% of those people then buy your game, that's considered a hit. More than 1%, it's a huge hit. That's weird. It should be, that's sort of the nature of the game industry. Part of it is that a lot of people, I think, that are in this audience don't really want to play a game for more than an hour. It's a problem. It's also gotten very crowded. When we did Diner Dash, there weren't that many games out there. But now the portals are flooded with games. They get many, many more game submissions that they can never deal with. Kenny, who's from Play First, who we worked with this year, you get how many games every week coming to you guys to publish? Like a dozen or more, right? A week. Portals are conservative. I think that one of the surprising things about the downloadable or game industry or casual game industry is that you think, hey, it's small scale games, it's not a big risk, there's no shelf space, there's no manufacturing and shipping, so we should see this explosion of creativity. Instead, in fact, for a variety of reasons, which I don't need to get into, there's a lot of similarity, and that portals are quite conservative in terms of the kinds of games that they're looking for, and it's hard to make money. When we sell a game, when Diner Dash is sold on Microsoft Gaming Zone, usually the portals, I won't say Microsoft, but usually the portals take a majority of every sale. They might take 60, 70, 80% of every sale. So there's just a few dollars that start coming back to us. Then there might be a distributor like Oberon in between Microsoft and Play First, our publisher. Oberon takes a cut, Play First takes a cut, and then we get whatever's left over. So that's quite typical, in fact, for the game industry. So it's hard to make money there. What is working, and I mentioned some of these things already, is that digital distribution is here, right? When we started Gamelab, there's a lot of hype in the .com industry about the fact that in the future, people will buy their culture online. Well, it's here. iTunes is here, and downloadable games is here. And that's a great thing. We don't have to put our games in a box and get them on a shelf in order to sell them. It's a bit of a meritocracy. If your game does fit the audience well, and it does fit this business model well, if a game converts well, then the portals will feature it. So it's not just a matter of the big boys pushing people out. On the other hand, if you do something that's very weird and experimental, that's harder to happen. Getting a successful downloadable game can lead to other platforms, and I do believe that digital distribution is where the game industry is going. This was us celebrating with a champagne toast our first royalty check from Play First from Diner Dash, so had to throw that in. Okay, the last sort of intangible that I want to talk about, I do want to leave time for questions, so I'm gonna talk even faster than I have been, is about being a process-focused company and sort of continually improving the process. Really, great ideas do not make great games. I believe a great process makes a great game. Even in Jonathan Blow's talk today, he talked about his, prototyping process and how that did or didn't lead to successful games. So ideas are less important than the process. If you have a good process in place, the process solves the problems. So we never try and put pressure on individuals to solve problems. Instead, we want to be sure that whatever kind of problem comes up, it's a pipeline production problem, it's a problem of lack of communication, it's a personal problem. Whatever's happening, we have the processes in place to take care of that. This means being process-focused as a company, having a process that touches every department and can solve any kind of problem that comes up. There's lots of components to this. It has to do with your senior staff being able to admit mistakes when they happen and creating a culture where people are okay talking about what's not working. And making everyone comfortable with the idea of staying on a process. Also picking tools and technologies that facilitate good process work. It's really hard to find development tools that work. There are some really good ones that work for very small groups, and there's some really good ones that work if you have 100 people or more. In that space in between, we've had some trouble finding tools to work with. I'm getting near the end now. I just want to talk about some of our recent games. We're pursuing new funding models. Lego Fever was sort of a partnership with Lego. They funded the game, but to a lesser extent than they would for a full budget. We're publishing it. Out of Your Mind is actually a co-production with Curious Pictures. They're an animation studio. They helped fund this game. We're publishing the game. We're co-owning an intellectual property that they as an animation studio might want to turn into a television or film. Work was actually funded by an individual investor. So we actually had, in that case, just someone investing in a project like a film. That investor, hopes that Work will earn its money back and make a profit for him. So we've been pursuing this. It's very, very difficult to find people to invest in your games. I mean, it sounds really good on paper. Venture capitalists will want to invest in your company, not in an individual project, because that's normally what they do. So it's very hard to find the partners for that. We've also been exploring new ways of doing new kinds of projects. We're looking beyond casual games now into multiplayer games. Casual games, we'll always be doing it. It'll be our bread and butter work. But we see huge potential in mass market multiplayer games. Hustling the MacArthur Foundation, and I mean that in the positive sense of hustling, of course. We're working on a project that's funded by a grant from the MacArthur Foundation. It's not a game, but it's software that's going to teach kids about game design by letting them create games. And that kind of led us to the Gamelab Institute of Play. We're creating a nonprofit sister company that we're getting funded also through, initially through the MacArthur Foundation and other kind of grant-making organizations. So we're, when I started Gamelab, I really, in my previous jobs, I had never wanted to even know about schedule and budget. I didn't want to know about revenue models or contracts. My eyes would glaze over when people started talking about that. I just wanted to make games. I just wanted to get my hands on making a game. But what I found is that if you really want to engage with creating innovative forms of culture, at a certain point you have to go beyond just the sort of creative questions within an individual project and think about how it is that your games are getting out in the world, how they're getting funded, and engage with the kind of business aspects of that as well. I'm skipping through this just to get to the conclusion so we can have time for some questions. But, like I mentioned, rules result in play, right? You create structures, and those structures result in certain kinds of experiences. That's not just a model for running a company. I also think that that's a way for us as independents to think about what an independent game culture might be, what an independent game business might be, right? There are constraints in the way that the game industry is structured, just like any design problem. But it's our challenge to figure out how we can tweak those rules, how we can play within that system in order to change that system. Because sometimes the play of a game can change the very rules of the game itself, like when players start modding a game, or when players invent their own homebrew rules for Monopoly, or what have you. Within the culture of games, I'm saying we have models for thinking about reinventing and transforming the game industry. And I think that that, to me, is sort of what's exciting. And if I didn't feel like we had that potential to really rethink what games are and what it means to have an independent game studio and what it means for all of us to work together to reinvent this game industry into something new, then I think that I wouldn't be here making games. Thank you very much. Okay. I want to take some questions. You can line up at the mics. I also want to say there's a great talk coming after me by the creators of Cloud that's going to start immediately afterwards, so please stay in the room for that. And if you want to have questions after the Q&A session, then I'll be right outside there. So while I'm packing up, maybe those people want to come and start setting up their Genova, Chen, and you guys can come start setting up. So, questions? Anyone? Any kind of question? Yes? Okay, I'm getting some people lining up. Hi.
When you're evaluating someone to be a new designer for your company, what do you look into them?
When I'm evaluating someone to be a designer at Gamelab?
Yes.
A game designer, you mean? Or yes. Anyone?
Particularly a designer, but you could expand it to anyone as well?
Well, that's a good question. I think the main thing that we look for is not particular technical skills. We look for someone who's really passionate about what they do at Gamelab. If you're looking to work at an independent studio, the worst thing you can do is send a generic letter that could have been addressed to any game company. We want to know, why do you want to work at Gamelab specifically? Do you know anything about who we are and what we do? Beyond that, it's more important that you have some kind of sensibility that you've cultivated rather than having technical skills. So we'd rather have a visual designer who doesn't necessarily know every piece of software, but instead really has a refined kind of sensibility or can really solve visual design problems. Similarly, if you're a computer science student, do you really have a strong math background? Can you solve problems as opposed to knowing software packages, which is also important too. But we need to find a balance between those two things. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Can you give us an idea of how many sales on a game would constitute a hit?
How many games have to sell to constitute a hit?
Yeah.
For downloadable games?
Yes.
I would say, I see some casual games people here. What do you say? Maybe 100,000 is considered a big hit? Would you agree? There's Kenny Dinkin, ladies and gentlemen, VP at Play First. Right. But generally 100,000 is a good bar for a game that's selling pretty well.
Thank you.
If you're saying that there's an overlap between people who would play casual games that are well designed and people who would play experimental indie games, how much room do you think a developer who's applying casual game principles has for more daring subtexts or themes to go outside the traditional kind of cutesy, family-friendly model of
what's the audience like?
Well, the audience would be, I guess, a variety of demographics, but people who are just interested in new experiences but aren't interested in highly complex interfaces like you get with some indie games.
I mean, the answer to your question is that the audience is there. There's no question to me that there is an audience for people that want to play different kinds of games that might even want to purchase them. I think that, the problem with the game industry as a whole is that it's kind of like the Hollywood film industry in that it's all center and no margins, right? We have, in terms of the mainstream game industry, the retail game industry, we have a lot of big budget productions. Big budget means that publishers don't want to take risks. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the converted, but what we need then is what I'm saying is that we need more ways that these games on the margins can find their audiences, can get distributed to them. I do feel honestly, and a lot of our work is trying to move in this direction, that there are huge audiences for games that are sort of people that are in college or post-college. There's a huge gap between hardcore gamers on the one hand and casual gamers playing Bejeweled and Mahjong on the other hand. These are people that grew up playing games. They're in their 20s and 30s now. They spend the most money online, the most time online. They have the most broadband connections. It's a really ripe audience. When I look at the games that are being made, at least most of the games in the casual games industry, they don't have the kind of hipness, smartness, irony, to edginess of pop culture, of television or music or film. So the audience is definitely there, and I think it's a matter of like finding the ways that we get the games to these people.
Would you say something like Work is oriented towards that?
Yeah. All of our games are trying to move in that direction, but we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. We're trying to make a game that Yahoo Games or Microsoft Gaming Zone would be okay putting on their site, but that also starts to reach into that territory. I think Diner Dash is a good example even of that sort of thing too. Yes. My time is up? Okay, time is up. Thank you all very much. And let's hear it for independent games. Yeah!